Record. And going live on the face melt. Number 20, huh?
You know something.
Transaction council. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for our Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 20, Suicide, the Hard Conversation. Needless to say, this is going to be a challenging conversation. So out the gate, if anybody is thinking or contemplating suicide, please realize that there is help out there. Please reach out to 1-800-273-TALK, or you can text 838-255. If you have lost someone you love due to suicide and would like support, visit safe.org. I'll be reading that multiple times throughout our discussion tonight because we understand that this is a challenging subject for all, especially for veterans. So with that being started, we've been trying to have this conversation. We're just about a year old as a group of concerned veterans. And one of the realizations that we had to come to is we did a buddy check, and buddy check is we were checking on each other to make sure we're okay, because the realities are suicide, and suicide tend to be at a higher rate in our veteran community than most communities. It's not exclusive to our world, unfortunately, and many people's lives are touched by suicide. It was touched very early in my lifetime, growing up in rural Louisiana and having a gentleman who is actually in my grade school fall in love with a girl of a different color, and he committed suicide. Um, because that was forbidden necessarily, dating people outside of your color in southern Louisiana at the time. And this is the mid to early 80s. So suicide touches us all, and it touched me kind of early. But when I got into the military, I served in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and we were always concerned and always talked to and about suicide. However, my generation was not so touched necessarily by suicide so much, as I know there was a great deal of Vietnam veterans that were touched seriously by suicide, but especially our GWAT veterans. The Global War on Terror is what I refer to when I say GWAT. And GWAT veterans, unfortunately, as we know, we lost over 7,000 in combat, but over 30,000 to suicide. And unfortunately, there's more numbers growing. There are specifically numbers around 22 a day. And you have to realize that that number isn't correct. We don't know the true number because we know that the data is skewed and we're not getting proper data from certain individuals. And so we want to have this hard conversation. And we're just going to start off with when do you recall learning about the number of suicides within the veteran community? As stated for myself, we were made aware of it as far back as basic training, going through basic training, because they didn't want people to take rounds and commit suicide, because apparently that had happened. Some kids got lonely when they, went to serve and were going through Fort Sill, and took a bullet back to where they were cleaning and committed suicide. So suicide talk and prevention kind of has always been in and around the military from my experience back in the 80s and into the early 90s, but I can only speak for my time and my place. So we're going to go around, as this is a roundtable, we're going to talk with our other veterans, and we're going to start off with Council Member Brian Buckley.
Thank you, sir. So that's a very good question, and somewhat embarrassing, I would say, in my spot. I tell people when you're involved in the military, and definitely the operation tempo that we had in the GWAT era, if you will, where the military really swelled up. I mean, you had the Marine Corps approaching, I think, near 400,000 or something. I mean, which is ridiculous. Marine Corps usually rolls at like 190 something. But we were just really busy. We were on one-to-one turnarounds, meaning you would deploy for 7 months, you're back for 6, you're back over 7. The Army, in my opinion, I don't know why they do it, and I thought they had it a lot worse, where they would send them away for a year, which is really, really tough. I mean, that's a lot of complacency kicking in that you have to fight those human factors. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, we were just so busy with our op tempo. You just were focused on the missions you had coming up and the people you were working with. You didn't really see outside of your box of what was happening, especially with veterans and people who got out. It was kind of unfortunate. If you had a guy you served with and they got out, they were kind of gone, and you still had another deployment to go, which is really sad to think about, probably because that individual got out, lost his tribe, and probably felt very alone. So for me, I think it was around the 2010, 2011 timeframe, you really started to hear there was some issues going on here with veterans. In particular, I would say Marine Corps were people who served in Operation Phantom Fury, which was the second battle of Fallujah. That was a very intimate, intense fight that went on for, multiple weeks, where people were going house to house to house, room to room, clearing them. I can remember some of the guys that I served with who were in that battle saying, sometimes they cleared the same house, and the only way they knew they were in the same house was as they saw the same dead guy and the rigor mortis was setting in. They saw his body changing, and they're like, oh, we've already been here. I mean, if you're in the military, you understand how systematic we break down things, but to show the chaos that was going on during something like that, guys were literally going back into the same house they already were in clearing. And I think, those individuals were kind of left, alone and unafraid when they got out. And that's when you started seeing the isolation aspects and some of the things that they were being prescribed. And unfortunately, I think only their best alternative they thought was taking their life. So apologize. It's a long about way of me explaining this, but yeah, for me, I think it was like 2010, 2011. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Going to go over to Council Member Prieta.
Hola, Granola. Appreciate you. Yeah, heavy subject for sure. It's taken us 20 episodes to get here, even though we've skirted it in our previous discussions. But like ATM, you were saying, suicide's there. It's not an uncommon subject in just the regular world or in the military. And as in the military police corps, you get talked to about different warning signs and stuff like that too. And you have to work with some people that are suicidal. And there's a lot of things that come up throughout a patrol where it's like anything can happen. You can be faced with any kind of situation at the blink of an eye. And my first interaction with suicide in the military, we were coming up at the tail end of our deployment, which was a year long, but we were kind of the middle children there, whereas the Marine Corps and Special Forces and others would come in for little hops, right? 6 months, 3 months, etc. My tour was about a year long, and then there were other people like First Armored and others who got extended for like 15, 16 months. And their fuck it meter was just off the charts. They did not care towards the end of it. They were resentful. But towards the end of that deployment, that included both Fallujah campaigns. I was in Baghdad when that was popping off. We had our a private Ramsey, Private Michael Ramsey, and he shot himself in his bunk 2 weeks before we were to redeploy out of Iraq. And that was the last casualty. And so that's how we capped our tour on a suicide. And my own kind of bunny rabbit trail, which I'm sure with the subject matter we'll get into at some point. But suffice it to say that the timeline's about the same with Mr. Buckley. I was at the University of Arizona, and there was just significant discussion about this epidemic that people were on the initial end of, or just realizing it, talking about it. And that 22 a day started getting thrown around, I remember. So it was, around like the latter part of 2010, somewhere around early 2011 when I started hearing that 22 a day, or I guess paying attention to it. But that would be my timeline.
Right on. Going over to Michael Crowitz, council member.
Thanks, man. I was trying to think. It's funny, you know, that there's a certain point in my memory where before that, I don't remember any suicide. I just can't remember any reference to suicide or anything like that. It was all, you know, avoiding death. It was like, you know, trying to avoid the draft so you don't get blown up, and trying not to get mugged in the city, and trying not to die of Agent Orange exposure even after you're home and battle was long ago. It was all these different ways to die. The first suicide that I can remember, there was actually, when I was in tech school, we had a really long tech school. It was like 42 weeks, something like that. Electronics, computer, and electronic warfare equipment, and it was transmitters and all this kind of heavy duty electronics that we had to learn. Took a real long time. So we were there in school for a long time. And in between school, if you went from one class and then you went to another class for a day or two, they would put you on this thing called AFI, awaiting further instructions. And then you get further instructions and you do it. I mean, you know, during that time, you were picking up cigarette butts around the squadron or whatever. And this guy got caught up in some kind of mix-up, you know, thing where he failed out of school, or they couldn't find another job title for him, or whatever. For whatever reason, he went on AFI indefinitely. And it was like months of AFI. Just, you know, we're like I said, most people have it for a couple of days. And he killed himself. And then when they went and looked in his room, they found in his little nightstand, he had a whole stack of checks he hadn't even cashed, all these paychecks. He just was stuck in this infinite loop. So I that's what I thought of it. That's what it sounded like to me. But anyway, the suicide rate, you know, the actual amount of suicide and stuff like that is something that in my memory just seems to creep in as I started learning more and gaining deeper understanding about cannabis. Maybe it was just coincidental. It's just the timing of campaigns to educate people about veteran suicide. I don't know. But I, like probably anybody else, when I heard, you know, that there were more people taking their own lives than there were that died on the battlefields that these folks fought on, it's hard to get your brain around that. I mean, it's really hard to get your brain around that. Our buddy Brian Crum, military vet, nurse practitioner down there in New Mexico, is really instrumental in adding post-traumatic stress to New Mexico, which then was our model for the rest of the country. He estimated that there'd be like 100 a day. If you looked at the country just as a whole, you're looking at like 100 per day, where the veterans are some big portion of that. Way out representative, considering we're just 1% of the population. We're way out representative of the percentage of suicides, whether it's 19 a day, 20, 21, 22, whatever. So I think, it's something that once you know it, you can't unlearn it. And once you know it, it comes with a certain amount of responsibility. But I think that as we'll talk tonight, you'll see that it's hard to know what to do to really make an impact in this one.
It's challenging, needless to say. And we're going to go over to Council Member Tony Landry. Council Member.
Thank you, ATN. My first time I was around suicides, I have some family members close, two first cousins that committed suicide early in life. And a couple of uncles that attempted, but so I'm thinking maybe it was some something in our genes, maybe inherited with us, or maybe something that happened during their early life, childhood. But other than that, I was a member of Honor Guard, and when I got out of the military, I didn't know anyone while I was active that committed suicide. But during those years of service in the Honor Guard, we buried, did ceremony honoring deceased veterans in Southwest Louisiana. And, sometimes we'd see, as a very young veteran that died, and it would just be known, kind of in a hush manner around the funeral home, because, everybody was on their mind. He was so young, I was looking at a veteran, maybe 20 years younger than me. And just, wondering what happened. And sometimes that would happen a couple of times, at least, while we were performing services for these young veterans, that you find out that they committed suicide. But yeah, if you put the numbers together, 20 a day, you start adding up. That's starts adding up pretty quick. And there's a lot more that are injured coming home with emotional trauma that end up taking their life here. And I think the key is recognizing maybe some early signs and trying to get some help. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of that later. But that's my experience with suicide.
I'm going to go on over to Council Member Crosby.
So I guess we didn't have, I guess in the Marine Corps, we didn't have too much suicide while we were in, but the ones that we did were pretty, devastating, more or less like, why would you do it then? Or how we had my second deployment, and there was a few in between, but the one that I recall most, we were stationed or put out on a combat outpost, which was, there was a little building. It was the three squads. Three small squads. We got shifted into 4 platoons right before we went outside the wire, so out of Al Assad. But we had a truck squad with us, so it was a weapons company attachment. And so we had like 50 guys there for a few months, so we got pretty close with each other. And we make it through. Luckily, no one, and none of the Marines got killed. A few of the Iraqi police that stayed on the combat outpost with us, unfortunately, did get killed in action. But we made it out, and we were getting debriefed to get back on the planes out of Al Assad Air Base, and you hear off in the distance a 3-round burst, and which happened to be coming from the head or the latrines on Camp Lima. I think it was Camp Lima in Al Assad. But we were practically lined up, getting ready to get on the bus, and this corporal that was on the base with us, or on the combat outpost, decided to put a few in his mouth just before we left to fly to Kuwait after pretty rough deployment. We were in a place where it wasn't really taken care of prior to it. We turned it around, and there was a lot of things that we could have been, that I am personally proud of what we did in some ways. And extremely upset about some of the things that we did also, but it turned out it wasn't anything that we did or we didn't do. It was back home stuff. You know, it's a terrible thing to hear your wife that you've been speaking so highly of for months is 3 months pregnant, 7 months into your deployment when you're about to come home. And it's something that's just, you know, I guess blindsides people. I mean, we've all been blindsided by something that you didn't think you're going to recover from, whether it be family stuff or financial stuff. But that was something that really resonates.
Thank you, council member. We're going to go over to council member Robert Kowalski.
Thank you. The subject, it's been around pretty much my entire military career. I remember the first time I was really introduced to like the veteran military suicide rate. I had just gotten my badge and my beret in tech school. And within 5 hours of receiving that, I was put on suicide watch duty, where I had to sit outside a troop's bunk for, I think it was 10 hours, 12 hours to ensure that nothing went on or that they didn't commit suicide. I believe they tried hanging themselves. And then it really hit me again after my first deployment. That first one was in 2007. And then in mid 2008, I came back from my first deployment, worked with a guy who was my lead for a while. And he ended up separating about 4 months of me being back home and on active duty again at base. And I think less than a week after he got out of the service, he ended up putting a gun to his head. And it started a ripple effect for us in the Air Force then. I know specifically at my base. And just a few months after that, I was going through pre-deployment training for my second deployment. And this one was different for the Air Force because it was a year-long deployment. So they kind of put us through a gambit of a bunch of classroom work. And I remember taking this class that was titled Steal Your Mind. And it was a course on trying to prepare your mind for what was to come, potential experiences, how to deal with death. And it was really something that the military tried harping on pretty hardcore. But I remember for the number of 22, I would have to say that didn't really pop up on my radar until a few months after I got out of service. And I really started diving deep into numbers and into problems and trying to establish my own nonprofit. It's when it really became a focal, in my eyes anyway, to where our populace and our population, our community was really suffering from this pandemic of suicide, and trying to understand the gambit of how we ended up there in the first place and ways that we could potentially fix it or change it has really been a driving force and something that I've looked into and tried to understand for some time now. So that's really what I got right now.
Thank you, council member. So when we're contemplating this this discussion, of course, we started to think about the numbers, and when we started to look at the numbers, we were aware that some states don't count certain situations. We're also understanding that there's also some things, numbers potentially, that are skewed due to suicide or potential suicide. In the sense, if you walk along this with us, pharmaceutical, of course, drugs have been pushed exponentially on the veteran populace. And of course, that can build up, or some of these medications cause suicidal ideation, Zoloft, etc. And so wondering, what sort of pharmaceutical impact has been had, in the sense as what may be a trigger or a psychosis trigger, or causing somebody to be outside of their normal self. But at the same time, what about accidental overdoses, in the sense of heroin and fentanyl, especially as of late, which are not happy thoughts in any way, shape, or form. But we have to understand that, there's different classifications that these deaths could be classified under, that could cross over into the suicide, and at the same time may not at the same time, because there is no way to know if that person was that intent unless there was some sort of notice or notification left, potentially. Otherwise, there's just no way of knowing. So I will go back again and state that if you or someone you know is feeling suicidal, please call 1-800-273-TALK, talk, or text 838-255. If you have lost someone you love to suicide and would like support, also visit save.org. Carrying on with our conversation, will talking about suicide to a person make them suicidal? We're going to start off with Ricardo. Brian? Sorry. Council Member Buckley.
So will talking about suicide to a person make them suicidal? Personally, I mean, I guess I would have to say with everything, it's always, a personal choice in terms of how they're going to respond to something. I mean, we're all built differently. In my opinion, no. I think it's kind of like, if you could step in front of someone before they made a mistake and say, hey, if you do this, you're going to be wrong, whether it be a math problem or, meeting a girl at a bar, I don't know, whatever it may be, and you could stop your friend from doing something that they're going to regret later, you would do it. And ultimately, that's the way I view suicide. I think it's a short-term knee-jerk reaction to certain situations that people are dealing with. And unfortunately, they feel it's the only way they can escape a problem is by just ending it all. To me, what's very alarming is, we're looking at suicide rates. We're not talking about old men and old women who've lived a life and, it is what it is. You're talking about kids who are in their 20s and, dare I say, now them in my 40s, kids in their 30s, where there's still a hell of a lot more living to be done and a lot more goals to accomplish. And that's when I think if you have someone that, even if it's your gut, your sixth sense, whatever it may be, where you think someone's going downhill and spiraling and they might do something that is going to lead to, the ultimate end, I think it is your duty to step in front of them and have a very serious conversation with them and let them know that you love them. Let them know there's a lot of people that love them. And I've even had talks with people that were at the door, step ready to knock on it and go through, where I talk about, look at celebrities who get, glamorized here in America. When they die, they get talked about for about 48 hours and then that's it. It's over. No one talks about them anymore. So that's one of those things, like if you do this, your show's over. The legacy's over. You can't do anything else after that. And people will forget about you, unfortunately. And that's a graver mistake. So I always tell everyone, you always got a second act. There's always something else you can do, something you can go out there and improve people's lives or improve this country's status, whatever it may be. But, to kind of circle back, yeah, if you know someone or you think someone might be at that situation that they're thinking about, you've got to get in front of them and you got to have that hard conversation.
Councilmember Pieta.
I feel the opposite is true. By not bringing it up or shunning the conversation or just convincing yourself that all right, it's whatever. You don't want to have that conversation really because of how it makes you feel. I think it's doing a disservice, not just to your friend who's going to do what they're going to do. And even if you talk about it, sometimes individuals just have their mind made up and they're going to do what they're going to do. And it has nothing to do with you. And I think us here at the other end of that sit and we rack our brains about what could have been done, what could have been said, when could interventions have been made sooner to have a more beneficial outcome. And unfortunately, it's just that those are questions that never get answered. Even with notes and stuff like that, sometimes notes and the reasoning and whatnot that are left behind cause more concern or question or frustration than not knowing. And nothing about this is neat. Nothing about this makes sense. And there's really no wrong way to go about this as long as you're sincerely trying to engage in saving someone's life, someone that you love, someone that you're friends with or acquaintances with, or just someone that feels they can trust you and come to you for help. Sometimes it goes the other way around. So you know, it's all right to have the radar up too, letting people know that you're willing to have these conversations. You're not going to run away. You can engage in the difficult deep dive. But I want to correct myself. I said Michael Ramsey, and it was PFC Joshua Ramsey. He was 19. He's 19 years old, baby, little kid. Not a little kid, but you know what I mean, old enough to go to warrior, man, but young, a lot of life ahead. That would be my answer to it's all right to talk about it.
I agree. Engaging in the conversation is key, and talking about it could, you know, more than anything, get it out of their system for some. But as you did state, some people do have their minds made up, and those are beyond frustrating because there's not much we can do. Councilmember Krawitz.
Yeah, man. Before I talk about that, you know, talking about suicide, I want to just kind of mention something about suicides that don't look like suicide. So I was asked a question by Doug McVeigh. Doug's a really good journalist. He's a great activist in our community. You know him well, Etienne. And sort of the backbone of the drug policy reform movement back in the 90s. Pioneer, really. OG pioneer, how about that? Doug will love that title. But anyway, he asked me just kind of right off the cuff, he said, well, what about overdoses? How many of those overdoses from opiates are actually suicides? And I didn't have any answer for him, but it was one of these questions that it logged in the back of my brain. I went home and studied it, tried to figure out an answer for him. The best I could tell, I mean, this is just my assessment of the data at the time. It's not up to date, and it's just me. I'm not a PhD or anything, but my assessment of the data was that, and the literature was that it's not likely that there's not likely a heck of a lot of crossover. It seemed more likely that the overdose rate from people that were taking pharmaceuticals under prescription, many of those may very well be from people trying to alleviate pain, that the pain medication just really isn't good at relieving. That's the whole thing about cannabis. Cannabis and the pain medicine relieves something much better than the pain medicine all by itself. You can wind up taking an extraordinary dose, a dangerous dose that at any given moment could kill you. But then the confounding factor that I found was, you know, that it just wasn't likely that the pills would be used in a suicide as likely as other means. And again, that was just statistics that I was looking at the time. So I think it's an important question to try to look at these data. You know, like Al Byrne was saying about, you know, the person that hits a bridge abutment, you know, no other cars around in the middle of the night at 100 miles an hour. Is that not a suicide? Be listed as a car accident. So I think it's worth looking at that, and it's definitely worth digging into it. As far as talking about suicide to a person, I think there's two different kind of talk. You know, there's talk that's helpful that we've been talking about, and then there's talk that's not helpful, which would be taunting or bullying or whatever that might actually lead to suicide, or help improve the likelihood of suicide. So I'd say words are a tool or a weapon. Be careful what you say.
Especially in the world of social media and how it can be said. There's new ways to bully that we didn't necessarily have in our day per se, over social media, which of course is a problem, and there's no easy solution to these discussions. So, but we want to have them. So going over to Council Member Landry.
Yeah, I believe it's okay to talk to someone, because a lot of times the suicide, many things will lead up to the suicide. It could be some anxiety that people just too anxious about the future and can't handle it, and they take their matters in their own hands, or they're depressed about something that happened in the past, and they just can't seem to live with it, or they're addicted, and they're just gonna like myself, whenever I was going through back depression with back injuries, I knew I was going to kill myself because I had children, and I said, well, I'm not going to kill myself. But when the opiates quit working and everything, and I went to the alcohol, I seriously looked at each drink as, a slow method of suicide. I said, well, I'm not going to kill myself, but I know this is going to help out. So it made me develop some patterns that I couldn't break. And I think the new stuff, discoveries coming up, amazing discoveries with psychedelics use to treat all three of those things. Psychedelics is being used to treat depression, anxiety, and addiction, and actually studies on it being a preventative for suicide, because it addresses those things that often lead to suicide. So I think it's important to if you see somebody struggling with some of those issues, try and get them out in nature, try and get them to reconnect with the joys of life, and just be there for them. It's very important, not to shun them and just, walk away from them, because that's when they need you the most, when they're going through those times. So I think it's okay to talk to somebody.
Yes, engage, find a way through. Council Member Crosby. Are you there, sir? All right, we're gonna switch up.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Yeah, my bad. In reference to confronting or identifying common characteristics of suicide, I think the suicides that really hit me hard were the ones that I didn't expect. I remember quite vividly of a call from a Marine that I was pretty close with. I mean, really close with, actually. And he called a couple days before he committed suicide, worrying about one of our other buddies, the way that he was being distant, or excessive drug use, or not being faithful to his wife, just some red flag stuff that doesn't necessarily mean he's suicidal. He was suicidal, but stuff that is going down a path that wasn't regular for the individual that he was calling in reference to. And I just look back at it and realize I didn't really ask him how he was doing. And the biggest thing for me personally, because I think we've all been there, maybe not to the point of leaning over the edge, but possibly stepping out onto the ledge and looking down. But the thing that really has always kept me going is me being fortunate enough to have people around me that deserve more than what would happen if I decided to commit suicide. And I mean, it's a personal thing, suicide, and it's not, and that's it. And it's the lack of realizing what you have, your potential, and who you're responsible to and who you're responsible for. And at the end of the day, I think it's reminding people of their purpose, even if it isn't this running through gunfire to save your fellow human being. And you might not see the glory in it, but getting through it and living life in the most useful way possible is that's where the glory comes in, I think. It's not easy, and you just gotta, you see any telltale signs, not necessarily emotional telltale signs, but the handing off of precious belongings, expensive belongings, really getting detracted from normalcy or whatever they're typically doing. And typically it's, you talk to the significant other, and they usually the ones that see the big change and the red flags. Most of the time we're really good at hiding our pain, especially in the people in the category that we fall into or fit into as the, essentially givers. We're terribly bad at asking for help, which is unfortunate. I still haven't been able to figure that one out myself, but we're good at internalizing our pain and pushing through it. But like Brian said, it's a short-term solution. It's a permanent solution to a short-term problem, and we got to reinforce that to anybody that we could possibly see that's potentially in that mindset. But at the end of the day, and something that I had, it took me a lot of suicides that I've had to deal with to realize that it's not our fault. It's an individual's choice, and it's a shitty choice, and holding ourselves accountable for it doesn't help anything. That's all I got.
Thank you. Councilmember Kowalski.
Yeah, everybody pretty much summed it up pretty well. I guess I would have to agree with everybody. I feel it's important to have the conversation. I think it's important to realize that suicide is a normal thought process that's been around forever. And I think it's also important to realize that as quickly as the bad thought came in, the bad thought can leave. And with that, just having the conversation with somebody, just changing the modality of the conversation. A lot of times individuals live day by day. And if we can have a conversation amongst that day to where it's just to reiterate, like Pearson said, that purpose of being an individual here on Earth, and having all of this life to live and all of these experiences to experience, just taking that and building back up the excitement that life brings in and of itself could potentially change that modality and change that mood. And sometimes that's all it takes, is just a little conversation with somebody to kind of pull them out of that funk, let them know that somebody's actually there, somebody understands it. Might not understand the exact situation you're going through, but we all understand a struggle of some kind. And that's the tie-in that each of us bring to the table, whether it's amongst ourselves, like us starting out as a buddy check, or somebody else to where they might not have experienced the type of environment a military veteran might, but doesn't mean that they're not suffering from a type of trauma that we can relate to. And I think just giving out that helping hand, having the willingness to have the conversation with somebody really just changes a lot of the dynamic.
Thank you very much, Council Member. I'm going to combine these next two kind of questions in a sense, because it kind of follows along the suit and ideas. Is suicide contagious, and has suicide impacted your life? Now, why is it contagious? As you know, when somebody, be it school, high school, grade school, college, etc., when a suicide happens, of course, they bring on grieving counselors, because they want people to, something slipped through the system, somebody slipped through the cracks, the situation wasn't recognized in time, the helping hand wasn't there. Unfortunately, that's just life, and needless to say, I has suicide impacted my life? Yes. There's quite a few, unfortunately. My grandmother committed suicide by starving herself to death. I had a good friend, Marlon, who was a kid and I went to art school with, and he decided to go out on a bridge, tie a weight to his ankles, and jumped into the Monongahela Bridge there in Morgantown. So it's impacted my life, like I said, from grade school to high school to college. And fortunately, not during my military experience, but later on in life and working cannabis, unfortunately, it still touched it. So, is suicide contagious? I think that it can be, if left unchecked. People can see it as a way to go about things. I mean, we've read about, suicide pacts. We've seen, group suicide situations happen. There's actually been movies made about such situations, depending on, the horrific situation people can find themselves in, and thinking that is the only way out. So as stated earlier, this is not a discussion that is exclusive to the veteran community or post-traumatic stress, so yes, I think that suicide can be contagious if left unchecked, like anything else. If it's not openly discussed about, if you can't have these honest discussions regarding these very challenging situations, then there will happen. And so that's why we're trying to encourage people to try to engage. Sometimes there's nothing we can do, and we'll talk about that. But yes, suicide has impacted my life. It is frustrating. It is angering. It is maddening sometimes. I hate mourning the dead. I even hate more mourning the living. But especially the dead, if it was possible to make them realize, I always wish, to say it's just a temporary chemical imbalance, just ride it out, it's going to change, things do get better. And that's the talk, and that's the discussion. However, is what it is. So I'll go on over to Council Member Rico, and then I'll check back in with Council Member Buckley. So do you find that suicide is contagious, and
So, can you guys hear me? I think suicide is contagious, like death is contagious. And in that, I mean, it's a reality. Death we all face. Suicide is a speeding up of that process. And if you have a tight-knit community and they start checking out, maybe that thought starts to come up in your mind a little bit more. And in the sense that it's an option, it is an option, whether it's an option we approve of or would choose. At any given time, I don't know. Right now, that's not an option that I see as something that I want. I have things I want to do here. I have people that I love here that keep me here, and I have goals, I have a mission, and I have things that I value here, not the least of which is the ability to breathe air. I like living, right? I've had my ups and downs. Suicide has impacted me. I've had a pistol to my head, and I've had my finger on the trigger, and I've had my suicide notes written out. And I too decided not to do that because of the people that I love that it would have impacted. And by the grace of God, the thought of them kept me from making that very horrible decision. And so a suicide is a very personal and individual act that the individual is accountable for. That individual is accountable for that action because it's happening and it's occurring to them. And what we're left with is a decision on whether or not that seems like a realistic or feasible approach to what it is that we are encountering day to day. Really, I think all of us on here can pretty much agree that we go day to day, take it as it comes. It can change at the drop of a hat. And so, yeah, like death, I think it's contagious. Get your mind right.
Thank you, Council Member. Going over to Council Member Michael Krawitz.
To me, it seems like it can kind of go two different ways. There can be a cycle that you can break, but there can also be, exactly what has been described before about, kind of a mode, a practice, a behavior, an example. I've seen both in my personal life. A good buddy of mine, cousins going the pharmaceutical route and dealing with the same diagnosed illness that he was diagnosed with in different age groups. The older age group, hit a certain age and he committed suicide. Taking the same medications, trying the same interventions. His cousin, when he got a little older, he committed suicide. And then my buddy, when he started getting close to that age, he was going to spiral. I mean, the drugs that he was taking were really causing some trouble for him. And he switched over to medical marijuana and dropped the pills and just put all his faith in medical marijuana. He still had a lot of problems in his life, but he never committed suicide. As far as I can tell, he broke the cycle. But on the other hand, I have seen, where a family member commits suicide and then a younger family member sees that and emulates that behavior later on. So, not to mention the good examples that were brought up before. So yeah, it's a tragic situation, a hopeless situation. I can only imagine. I can't imagine. I can only imagine, but I know I can't imagine, if that makes sense.
More than you realize. Yeah, for sure. Council Member Landry.
Yeah, is suicide contagious? I'm thinking more it comes in like waves or like with surges with different things like the global war on terror. People do multiple tours and it comes back, a surge or a pandemic it causes, surges in suicides then. But that's what's so promising about, the only way they have to treat it is SSRIs and some other, things that they've been using, and it's just not working. And the thing is, for treatment resistant depression, there's not much hope, but it looks like 40 different studies going on with using psychedelics to treat depression right now. And it's very promising. It's like a psychedelic renaissance. And I think it's very exciting work. And I think everybody needs to get behind that. If you're not aware of it, just look into that. If you can get even ketamine, Medicare will pay for ketamine treatment. And if you're down in the dumps and just nothing's working, getting up, and by God, if you can go try and have a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy session, all this stuff is psychedelics. It's nothing like party drugs. It's clinical psychedelic assisted psychotherapy where you have a clinical setting and you're able to get up, get a 30,000 foot view of your problems, and sometimes just that is enough to shake you and say, well, it's not that bad. I can change my behaviors, and when I have those flashbacks or that traumatic experience come up, I can recognize it and adjust my behavior and not get depressed. And that's what's so promising about this, because it's not something you have to take every day. It's not addictive. There's some precautions for people with history of schizophrenia or bipolar. But for people with just nothing else to try, it's very promising right now that they have this stuff to go to. So we're looking forward to seeing more studies come out.
Yes, more data, more studies. So when we're having and breaking down this discussion, we'll take it off here in a second. I want to go on over to Councilmember Kowalski, such as, is suicide contagious and has suicide impacted your life?
Suicide has definitely impacted my life. I touched on it a little bit in the beginning. It's been pretty regular since I joined the service, maybe even a few years before that when a friend of mine overdosed. But a concept I really wanted to bring up around the contagiousness of it is a reference I think about what in this conversation would be a reference to the Matrix and the Oracle. And when the Oracle says, don't worry about the vase or something, and Neo turns around and knocks over the vase and it breaks. And the question arises, would that have happened if I didn't say it? And I think that's a good explanation here, or a good analogy here for, is suicide contagious? I think a lot of times what really makes it seem so is the fact that you're presented with it in real time, whether it be conversing about it, having somebody close to you that's done it, or seeing a news article or something about it. And a lot of times, going back to my previous comment, that thought that enters your mind, all it takes is a reference point to that thought for the thought to enter. So I think in that case, yes, it can be contagious, but going back to kind of like what Rico said, and getting your mind right and preparing your mind for it. If you can prepare your mind for something like that, or prepare yourself for the understanding that this type of incident could happen, you may be presented with this type of incident. I think that's kind of the key of keeping yourself in the present and keeping yourself out of that real nasty rabbit hole that you can find yourself going into, and thinking about it. Is this the easier way? Is this the right way?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. When we were also having this discussion, we were realizing, there's course, we're talking about the reactions and the negatives regarding suicide. Of course, we're raised in Western society, and most societies believe that suicide is considered wrong, evil, bad, you go to hell, etc., etc. However, what happens when you're staring at an end-of-life situation? I work in and around with people who have cancer, AIDS, and other debilitating diseases. And sometimes, unfortunately, medical treatment has run its course, and this no longer becomes the evil, bad situation that it is. It becomes a real choice. It became such a real choice that the state of Oregon actually passed a law due to efforts and issues done by somebody like Dr. Kevorkian. Dr. Kevorkian was a doctor who designed suicide-assisted machines. He could not actually pull the trigger on the machine because that would actually be called or considered murder. It would actually have to be done by the person who is making this choice. I do know people who have been put in these unfortunate end-of-life situations and made the hard choice to end their own lives due to quality of life issues. So I don't want to say there's, a good discussion around suicide, because, it is necessarily a challenging thought and issue, but, when is suicide okay? Dr. Kevorkian, et cetera, is kind of the question. So we're going to start around with Council Member Prieta.
End of life situations, right? It is a personal choice. It's probably the most personal choice. This deciding for yourself when it is that you are done with this place and you are ready to enter into the unknown. And with that in mind, I respect an individual's right to choose for themselves whether or not I agree with it, to do what they feel they need to do at the end of their lives. And what I was talking about, I feel like what we were talking about leading up to this point in the conversation are real tragic cases and situations where everybody on the outside who is looking at this individual sees such promise and hope, and there's love there, there's camaraderie, friendship, and an attachment, and it feels too soon. It feels too soon, right? And those real traumatic events are ones that just, they stick with you. And another situation where I can think of, I feel like justify is a hard word, because again, it's a personal decision. Downrange, especially when they started putting videos out of people getting decapitated and whatnot. Me, for myself, I wasn't gonna be in a situation where that was a possibility. And so if it came down to it and I was in a situation where there's nothing else to do, like, okay, well, got as far as I can get. But the idea or the thought of giving myself over to someone who has already demonstrated that that's where their headspace is at, that wasn't an option. That wasn't an option for me. And yeah, these are the kind of conversations that I feel we need to have. We need to start breaking down the really uncomfortable, gritty, difficult conversations and topics. If we expect to get anywhere on any of these issues, any of them, prohibition, social justice, suicide, war, climate, anything. We got to be able to just be honest with the situation and what it is that we're facing. And then start to, from that point, which is base, a foundation, start throwing out ideas on how to address it. But yeah, that's where I'm at with that question.
Councilmember Michael Crowitz.
Yeah, man. It's yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, what do you say? I mean, it's reality, right? There's I'm into antiques and collectibles, and you'd be amazed how this stuff all crosses over, right? So somebody showed up at an Antiques Roadshow and he had this toolbox that he had bought at an auction, and in the toolbox were these two little pins, and he thought from looking at them that they looked a lot like what he saw in the history books from the pilots that piloted the U-2s, their suicide pin. And sure enough, that's what they were. They were worth like $10,000 because they were so rare. But you know, these are real things. These are real, you know, that we had many different military troops that carried suicide devices with them, government troops, CIA, whatever, that recognized that if they got caught, that they would be subject to interrogation that might actually reveal secrets and make the country vulnerable. And actually that was, you know, something that couldn't be tolerated. But also the likelihood of torture and death, that getting caught under those circumstances would likelihood would be death, that this was an alternative. So, you know, these are things that are real, but again, you know, I refer you to my little bit of research that I did where I was looking at the assisted suicide and found that, you know, I just sort of logged these things in my brain. Again, I'm not a PhD and I wasn't doing a research project, but I sort of logged it in my head that it was surprising the folks that actually did take advantage of the suicide assistance or the law ability to take their own life, yeah, under the state law, by and large weren't who you would expect them to be. They weren't the people that couldn't put a spoon in their mouth or whatever, intractably disabled. It just typically just wasn't the people that you were expecting. That's what I remember from that research. So I think that, you know, that's what we're all here about. It's not the folks that committed suicide, you know, because they were on the 50th floor of the World Trade Center and it was on its way down and they jumped out the window. We're concerned about the people that have, you know, as been said, a temporary situation that they're curing with a very, very permanent solution. You should at least follow my better half as a rule that I'm not allowed to make any major purchases without thinking about it for 3 days. Well, if you're about to kill yourself, at least, you know, put that on a shelf for 3 days. At least I use the same rule that I'm supposed to use when I'm buying a new microwave.
There you go, the 3-day rule, duly noted. Going over to Councilmember Landry.
Yeah, I have the only story I have, you know, about that suicide is my neighbor was a lineman for an electric company, and he ended up getting electrocuted in a bucket, and they brought him to the hospital, and he's telling me the story, and it's right across the street from me, and I visit him, and he said, Tony, he said, whenever I was on that table, he said, I died 3 times. They brought me back to life. The doctor told me, he said, I had to bring you back to life 3 times. And he said, during that time, he said, I had a conversation with my mother. And he said, it wasn't like a dream that I was thinking, a past conversation with her, and his mother had passed. His mother was deceased. And he said, you know, it was like very real, like it was a real-time conversation. And she said, it's not your time yet. You know, you still have some things to do on earth, and not your time, go back. And so he said when he came back, he was mad at the doctor, screamed and yelled at the doctor for bringing him back. But he, you know, the course saved his life, and he healed and got better and went back home. But he started this, he became the president of Buckmasters in Louisiana, and he brought disabled children out to hunt that maybe would have never gotten an opportunity to go hunting. And he was able to serve that billet, you know, and he could easily came back and gave up, you know, and gave up on life. But I think we all have a purpose to keep living. And anyway, we suffering through some trauma and hard times in life. There's a reason to keep going. And I think this assisted suicide, I mean, psilocybin is being used for end of life anxiety, and patients are getting terminal sentenced with cancer or something, and just relieved of all the anxiety. Said, it's no problem. You know, I know I'm dying. I was only going to be here a short time anyway. You know, I think we're just spiritual energy occupying this body. And while we're here on this earth, you know, it's our duty and our job to do what we can to help our fellow citizens. And, you know, any way you're suffering, you can do. There's little things you can do. Just reach out to someone else to suffer maybe, and on a good day, and try and lend a hand to them. And then, you know, there's purpose for you to be here. And I think I don't agree with assisted suicide. I'd have to be a personal experience if I was going through something, maybe just make that call. But I don't want to advocate for it. I think everybody has a reason to be here.
And Council Member Kowalski.
I guess my thought process is kind of the least popular of one. I'm a firm believer in the right to choose. As individuals and as people here on this planet, we have the right to choose what we as individuals do. We have the right to choose what we intake or ingest. These are decisions we make as free thinkers and as Homo sapiens. So when it comes to the question of like assisted suicide, I can't tell or put into words what my fellow council members are feeling at this moment. I can't tell you how much pain each of you are in. I can't tell you what your mood is in right now. What I can do is have a conversation with you. And I think the choice ultimately resides in that individual. If they feel in that moment that is best for them, who am I to say they're wrong? But at the same time, am I going to do my best to ensure that selfishness of wanting to have that person stick around isn't going to get in the way? Absolutely it is. But again, I'm going to revert back to, as individuals and as people, we are beings that have evolved in such a way to where we can think freely for ourselves. And I think prohibiting that free thought process in humans kind of sets us back a little bit. So that's my thought on that.
Thank you, Robert. As stated, if you or someone you know is feeling suicidal, please call 1-800-273-TALK or text 838-255. If you've lost someone you loved to suicide and would like support, please visit save.org. As we continue our conversation, and as we bring it back, because as we are talking specifically in reference in our discussion to veterans and veteran suicide, we wanted to cover all bases, and we haven't covered every aspect or basis of suicide, but these are ones that we have decided to take forward. So we wanted to talk about, since many of us have either considered suicide or had that ideation in the past, we wanted to give you kind of a discussion about post-traumatic growth, such as what is post-traumatic growth? Well, it is considered a theory that explains a kind of transformation following trauma. It was developed by psychologists in the 90s and holds that people who endure psychological struggle following adversity can often see positive growth afterwards. So people develop a new understanding of themselves, the world they live in, how they relate to people, the kind of future they might have, and a better understanding of how to live life. And so each one of us have seemed to have found our own way in life and wanting to step out of our comfort zones. We've each suffered from various traumas in life. I myself had my post-traumatic situations regarding my experience in war, and been able to come to terms with those by basically actively helping others. I was able to find my voice as an activist in the cannabis community by stating what I had experienced and giving the example of my cannabis use and experience surrounding that. As a veteran that was thrust into the light of, now you have to go find, your medicine, etc. So I learned a lot about social justice and social justice issues, and found myself healing by actively contributing, volunteering, speaking, talking to others, passing out information, lobbying, finding a way to use my voice to affect a social justice situation. In my case, I found it to be medical cannabis, and that kind of became my crusade along with hemp. But again, always came back to medical cannabis because it was in turn my medicine. I'm a medical cannabis patient. I've been recommended medical cannabis for decades for my Gulf War syndrome and various illnesses that stem from that. So my post-traumatic growth was finding my voice, but that was my experience. Everybody here has found their way and their example. And so we're going to go check in with everybody so they can get an understanding of how each and every one of us have found, our post-traumatic growth. So what does it mean to you, Council Member Parieta?
Well, post-traumatic growth to me means anytime you survive a traumatic event, it doesn't have to be war or anything heroic or legendary or epic or anything like that. Sometimes the most horrific shit happens at, again, the blink of an eye in the most obscure manner. It's like, really? And you have to sit and try to process that. So surviving the traumatic event is, and then being able to move on is growth. What you do with that after that experience, depends on you. It's, again, individualized based off of who you are, your journey up to that point. And for me, after combat, I found my real post-traumatic growth opportunity that I didn't think of that word. I'm gonna go get some post-traumatic growth today. Whoop whoop. It didn't come to my mind. Although it's catchy, I guess. Kind of fun to think about. But I was just like, man, I got to do something. It's just sitting here stewing and all these negative thoughts and this energy that's like a weighted blanket over my face, right? I had to break out of that shell, break out of that cycle, break out of the seclusion that I had found myself in. And so getting back onto campus and then helping other people turned out to be like really inspiring for me. It was like it was a narcotic, it was a new drug. And the more I saw that I was in positions to help more and more people, the better it got. And so that, and then getting into new hobbies, learning new things, hanging out, being open to different experiences, cultures, and whatnot. Try to say yes a lot get out of my comfort zone, get out of the bubble, because you never know what's on the other side of that, within reason, you know. But define your post-traumatic growth. It's one of the beautiful things about it. And then share that with somebody else who may be down a bit, or who may need a boost, a helpful hand up, some words of wisdom, as they say. That's how I would define it for me, post-traumatic growth.
Councilmember Krautz.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I've been thinking about that. It's not hard for me to think about where I first heard that term. Nurse Heather Manis was the first person I ever heard that term from, but I don't think maybe she coined it even, but it was synchronicity. I think it had been coined long before. But it's interesting, you know, it reminds me of time I was talking with Al Byrne on a panel at a Patients at a Time conference, and he asked me to say a few words from my perspective about post-traumatic stress. And up until that speech, I never really thought about myself and post-traumatic stress. I've been working for others. But this is the same kind of thing, you know, talking about that, putting myself in that context. I mean, I got hurt. My life was turned upside down. I ran as hard as I could up the wall of an education, of retraining. I couldn't do the field that I was in the Air Force anymore. I had to be retrained, kind of go up the level a little bit and get a little bit more skilled. And I was in engineering school and busting my ass, and I had good grades, but I just couldn't make it. I just couldn't do it. It was like it was like I was running in a wheel that I just couldn't get to spin. I get it to partially spin, drop back, try it again, and then finally gave up. And instead of, you know, flaming out and just burning out and having that be a spiral down in my life, it just was for me just a retooling. You know, I tell people that I started as an activist while I was at school, and I just continued at activism, and it gave me something to do in my retirement, basically, and kept me out of the wife's hair. It's all true, but it's also been really therapeutic. It's funny, you know, we get to meet some fantastic people in this stuff, world leaders, movie stars, incredibly inspirational thinkers and cannabis people from every walk of life. And I got to work with Sunil Agarwal, Dr. Agarwal, one of our esteemed mentors in the cannabis movement, one of our top people. And he was in my little core team there in New York when we reestablished the New York NGO Committee on Drugs. And I was talking to him, you know, as a friend, but he's a really top-notch doctor, you know. And after a while, I was talking about something. He said, you know, you get a therapeutic effect from helping others get access to medicine. I was like, huh? And he was just making an observation. It was really astounding, you know, like how intense he was about it, but how true that is, you know, that this has been something that, you know, has given me, you know, as you guys have been talking about, purpose, you know, if you want to, maybe that's it, giving somebody purpose, maybe that's the key to it. But being able to do something that you feel is within your ability to do, that can actually make a difference in the world is you know, some sort of runner's high or whatever, I don't know. But it definitely helps, and it's helped me, you know, find a path through this life. I mean, I'm still a basket case, broken down vet with a lot of problems, but I've gotten to hang out with Snoop Dogg. No, whatever.
Well, there you go. See, opportunities that life by living life gives you. Councilmember Landry.
Yeah, that was good, Michael. Yeah, post-traumatic growth for me is you know, learning to not allow the triggers as far as with chronic pain. I'm not diagnosed with PTSD or anything like that, and I don't feel like I have PTSD, but chronic pain, the triggers for me were to go to drinking or you know, maybe to get angry or upset when I start hurting. And now I learned to my growth part is to recognize when I get that trigger, there's two different options. I can, go on the old path with the drinking and getting those ruts in that, or I can just notice it, recognize what's going on and process that thought, if it's a pain cycle, I have to get up sometime. If I'm in a meeting, I'll turn my camera off and I'll stand up a while to give some relief to my lower back. I had a couple back surgeries. So my growth is learning to recognize those triggers and address them in a way that's positive. I know if I get up, I'm going to stop hurting. So I got to do that. I got to stop and address that. I know if I'm going to get upset, that it's not going to be, if I'm getting pain cycle, I know I have to stop what I'm doing, or at least let somebody know I'm in a really bad pain cycle. I have to address that. That's growth to me, rather than using the old easy methods of using, crutches that I used to use. It's using that growth and like Michael said, using my time positive in a positive manner for drug policy reform. It's rewarding. It's growth thing for me. So that's how I use it. I'm able to grow by recognizing the triggers that would normally send me off a path to drinking. I'm able to address that and try and do some things to change that situation without falling for those old vices.
Thank you, Council Member. Council Member Kowalski.
Yeah, I'd have to agree a little bit with what Mike had to say. I think the first time I heard that term was by Nurse Heather Manis. And so I definitely have to give her credit to introducing me to this term of post-traumatic growth. And then maybe going a step further, Nurse Neek, a Marine veteran, and she dubbed the term positively perceiving perception. And through those two women, I've come to learn and create essentially the tagline around veterans ending the stigma that healing begins with purpose. And to me, that's where the growth of you as an individual overcoming your trauma really comes from. How you perceive the trauma that you've experienced, and how you can make yourself appear to others after experiencing that trauma really presents the growth cycle that I see when I hear post-traumatic growth. It's a concept really that I tie to quite well. It's really stuck with me for a long time. A lot of people don't know I was diagnosed as an agoraphobic. So I would essentially lock myself in a basement and I wouldn't leave for anything. And it wasn't until I found a purpose to save not only my own life to help me with the pharmaceuticals I was on, but to assist veterans and what our community was dealing with, that I was able to get myself out of that funk. And once I was able to get myself out of that funk and all of a sudden had a purpose again, it was a slow process, but I was able to slowly integrate myself back into the world. It didn't come overnight, and I had to realize that it was part of the growing process, that I couldn't just jump into the deep end and expect it to be okay. I kind of had to get my toes wet and ease myself back into society again in such a manner that when you're in a state to where you're afraid of leaving your own home and having the capability of overcoming that really provides you with a necessity to share how you did it. And this is why I've started studying this this whole concept of collective trauma and the hero's journey. I'm a big sci-fi fan, and if you read or watch a lot of sci-fi movies, it all starts with a hero or a heroine who starts their journey off with some type of quest, some type of something that they're going to go and they're going to accomplish. And that quest always presents them with a physical component, but also a mental one. And ultimately being a lot of times portrayed as the ultimate being of yourself as the dragon, as slaying the dragon to get to that final prize. And then if you follow further, if the story doesn't end or the movie doesn't end, what you see next is the coming home of that heroine and the process that that heroine takes in sharing the story of the adventure, sharing with the community the trials and tribulations that they themselves had to experience and get themselves through. Becomes a situation to where that's teaching us about this growth process to trauma. It's teaching us that if we share our stories as a community, our own experiences and how we have overcome those experiences, what we've now done is provided tools for individuals to use themselves in their own growing process, in their own healing process. And I guess that's what I would stop at right there.
So since we've all been impacted by suicide in our lives, what are different ways to process the grief after a loved one has committed suicide? What do we do? Councilmember Ricardo.
I think one of the most inspiring things that I've seen occur from the process of grieving a loved one happened here locally with this Ben's Bells project. Local mother lost her son, and she went through a lot of the stages of the grief and whys and all the frustration that we've been talking about. And she didn't lose her son to suicide. It was tragic nonetheless. And she ended up going into her workshop and then created some little bells out of ceramic and then different things. And then her friends and family and the neighbors came in and then helped her. And then all of a sudden they started creating more. And then they started leaving them around town. And with the little bells, they put little notes, right? And be kind and stuff like that. Pay it forward, essentially, right? You can keep this. This is a gift. Take it home. Use it as a reminder to be kind. And I love that. She was able to take a deep personal loss and transform it into something really beautiful and meaningful and lasting. And so when it comes to what an individual does, again, like those are choices that are beyond anything that anybody can tell to anybody else or whatever. It's, what do you feel? Where are you at? What do you need? What'll help? Sometimes doing nothing just feels like the right thing to do. And there's no wrong answer, right? So that's what I got.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Kravitz.
Yeah, we were talking. I realized that there's a basic premise that you really have to understand kind of where we're coming from. And that basic premise is that from our observations in the cannabis movement and our veteran stakeholder group, we found that undertreated, poorly treated, or not treated post-traumatic stress is a big contributor to suicide. And this is something that we know firsthand, but we also have some data. And being that, you know, it's so well recognized that suicide is related to military service. I mean, they're giving it a number, and they're saying that this number of vets, I mean, that, think about what that means. We're looking at the numbers that they're not counting, but look at the ones they are counting. Those are very obviously related to military service suicide. So Patrick wasn't able to join us tonight. He's Patrick Seifert, working over Washington State. He's been working on this issue for a while, trying to figure out how to tackle this suicide number and bring it down, eliminate it. And there's an idea out there. I don't know, where the idea is at now, but he might have been able to tell you better off the top of his head. But there's a white star idea of a white star. Like there's a gold star for someone that is a family member of someone who was lost over in battle. There's a white star proposed to give to the family members of someone that died from suicide. And I think the more that we could do to recognize that those suicides are related to military service and help people understand how they're related to military service and help the family feel that they lost a loved one due to their service to their country in the trauma that they experienced, not from any kind of secondary psychiatric condition that they might have that in their mind. That's not the way it works. Post-traumatic stress is an injury. It just doesn't affect necessarily everybody that's in the trauma situation, and that maybe makes it hard to understand that it's not. But it's not a disorder in that sense, in the classical sense. And I think that I think the more we can, break that out and make people understand what's happening, get in the kind of background story of those suicides and make people understand what happened in each case. They're probably unique, but they're probably each one in its own way instructive and helpful to help us figure out how to stop this. So, that's the how I suggest dealing with the process of grief is trying to make it not happen again. Seems to be a logical thing to do. And that's my advice on how to do that is bring it into the light of day, give it the honor it deserves. And yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Councilmember Landry.
Yeah, I could speak. Suicide, talking with the loss of grief, could be you could have some very angry feelings possibly for the person that left committed suicide. And I think any way you can reach out, to write a letter and and express your anger, if that's going to help out, that's okay to do that. And just grief in general, the loss of someone, the way I process it, my father just recently died. And, I keep a conversation with him. I have a picture on the icebox and I have his apron there whenever I cook a meal or something. It's me and Pop cooking. Hey, what are we cooking today, Pop? So, you can still have a conversation and whatever you want to mention to that person, you can still talk to them, and that's how I process the grief. Just keep on talking to them. That's what you can do.
Right on. Next, Council Member Robert Kowalski.
I think it's important in grieving to continually share stories. I think storytelling's an important piece in grieving and in remembering. A lot of times what I've seen is fear of what's left behind when someone passes. And I know it's always been on my mind. Am I going to do right? And am I going to leave a good impression or a good feeling on those I leave behind when I do, to where they're going to have something good to say. And so I think, like Tony said, you know, living in that moment and sharing that moment with someone who's passed. You know, I too have some things for my grandmother when she passed away from cancer that I still hang on to and I look at every day. And it's an instant reminder that that was a good woman. She was a good woman for me to have in my life. And she taught me a lot. And my only hope is that I can continue to do that for my kids or my friends and family. Another thing too that I've noticed really within the veteran community is we all have memorial bracelets of individuals that we've lost as a way to remember them by, as a way to hold on to a piece of our family that we've lost, that we were connected to. And it oftentimes becomes a conversation piece. It becomes something that allows us to share the stories of what good men or women they were. And I think just that alone really helps someone process the grief, and also remembering that trauma is a muscle memory. I think is also important. A lot of times it can be very beneficial just to go get some fresh air and go for a walk and live in that moment to kind of help the grieving process pass.
Thank you, council member. So people talk about loss of self, especially when they're talking about suicide. So, you know, what are ways to reconnect with yourself and your community? Each one of us found our own way differently. So what are some ways that people have, you know, found that help them, you know, gain reattachment to themselves again, you know, when you've been through these sort of tough situations? Councilmember Prieta.
For me, gardening has been huge. Right? Just getting out, working with plants and taking care of them and tending to them and stuff like that. And then I started with one little garden piece, and then all of a sudden it was like my entire backyard. And then all of a sudden it was like my entire front yard. And before I knew it, I was meeting neighbors, and I was getting people just stopping and complimenting me on my different flowers and plants and stuff like that, just which would then lead into really friendly conversation. It was a great way to get to know my neighbors. And then the volunteerism, I definitely have that. I got the ism, the volunteerism. And that has been another way to get outside of the issues that I'm facing in my little kind of shelter box where there's nothing but the issue that I'm facing. And as soon as I step out and I engage with other people and I start laughing and I start telling jokes, or I start working on some project that I didn't even know about an hour ago or a day ago. And then by the end of it, like all the people I came and helped, they're like really excited, which makes me excited. Like, yay, we did this thing. And then I go back, and I getting out there, volunteering, and yeah, gardening and volunteering. That's where I would go. My top two.
And a good two at that, I must say. All right, Councilmember Krawitz.
I was just thinking about a sci-fi movie that I watched years ago where they created a machine that as a sentence, they could sentence you to like a year in jail. And it only took like a minute on the machine. They would do it all psychologically. But I was just thinking it would be interesting. You just go to jail for a few days and make it a mild jail, but a jail nonetheless in your mind, and take very careful notes of what you missed the most during those few days. And then after that, and for the rest of your life, do those things. and it's funny, I bet you 9 out of 10 that those are not the things grab from your house and get in a helicopter and leave. You're looking at your possessions with a whole new light than you were a few minutes earlier when you were trying to find the ice tray. So I don't know. It's all sliding scales of sliding scales of permanence and value. I found myself in the military building a wall, like a brick wall, brick by brick, that blocked me off from everybody, and nobody could know me. And I was military troop, good troop. I had no past. I was green, whatever. And then after I got out of the service, brick by brick, I dismantled that wall, and becoming a cannabis activist was part of that as well. Coming out, so to speak, and being more and more open about supporting cannabis legalization. I mean, when I started, that was a that was a rebellious act. Now it's like, oh yeah, sure, it's a up and coming industry with young people coming out of college with PhDs in cannabis. Wasn't like that back when I started. But anyway, yeah, coming out and sort of making yourself vulnerable to the world is scary, but it's also necessary. I have hobbies, things that I do that I really enjoy. Get out to the flea market, meet with people, have a regular life, do something. My buddy over there, Jules, one of our casualties from the bloody COVID down in South Africa from the mayhem, he would tell you, don't be one-dimensional. Get out there and do something.
Do something, do something, do something. Plug in, for sure. Councilmember Landry.
Yeah, and that's even more important nowadays with people working from home, with isolation and all that. We're social animals. We need to be around people, and that's with everybody. I mean, I think it's important to get out and do some art, or join a local civic group, or a gardening group, or anything that you can do to give back to the community a little bit. It's going to feed your soul, and it's going to give you a task. If you're suffering from some deep depression right now and just stuck in home in your house, and just one day a week, if you can commit to one day a week, setting your timer, get up and go do something to feed your soul. You need to give something back to your soul. Don't isolate in the house and think that that's going to work, because it's not. I've been through it before with my back surgeries and all, just wanting to shelter in, and that was the worst parts of my life. When I look back on, I thought that was the answer, just staying home, shutting in, but it wasn't. So anything art therapy or anything you can do in the community is going to help give you something and help give the community something. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Robert Kowalski.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Rico. Pretty 100%, really. My first thing was turning to gardening. I first got into gardening really through cannabis, trying to help myself get past my own suicide attempt with opioids and the pharmaceuticals. That was the first thing I was able to turn to, and it was really out of an affordability problem that I turned to cultivation. And it was through that I really found something I enjoyed again. And I think enjoyment is one of those things that are lost, especially when when you're suffering from high points of depression. So through the gardening and whatnot from cannabis, it led me into actually growing my own garden, my own vegetable garden and fruit garden. Led me down the path of joining a gardeners club, to where I got to share and learn stories of different things, from indoor cultivation to outdoor cultivation, with a 90-some-year-old gentleman who has been gardening since he was my age, in his young 30s. So sharing the educational component that came with gardening kind of is what led me into the advocacy, volunteerism, as Rico put it, that I've grown to kind of lean on to keep myself going, to keep myself in a mindset to where I'm capable of realizing that I do have qualities that I can give back and provide. I do have resources and bits and pieces of my own life that may help someone else. And it's through that I really find my calling. And that's kind of what I would tell others to do, is find something that you enjoy and utilize it as a catalyst to find your calling. It could be something as simple as, gardening and it leading down advocating for climate change, to identifying food deserts within your own community, to where you can help give back to your community just by simply growing your own garden and getting lost in the soil. So I think that would be where I've turned to, and I kind of recommend others trying.
Thank you, council member. For myself, it definitely it was music. I love music. I like creating music. I like playing with other musicians. I found definitely art, especially gardening and growing cannabis, were great ways to get in touch with myself, became daily mantras, and to actually create something and to see it come and grow to fruition was a great, very life affirming, and one that I have found working with many patients, they have found to be extremely beneficial. But, I found, I realized, of course, life is temporary, but so are emotions and feelings. And, I can change and alter a mood by what music I listen to. If I want to be melancholy, I can go pull melancholy music. If I want to be fucking kick ass and ready for whatever's coming, that music's there and it can pull me out of a funk. When I was in the military, I had my own soundtracks. I made my own audio tapes during my war so that, I would at least have my soundtrack in my ear so that, I could have those motivations on those shit days where it's fucking cold and you just did 6 hours of guard duty after pulling 18 hours of, war. And now you got to figure out what's right, what's up, what's down. I could pop in a cassette and music and it could take me away. It could bring me right back to self. It could bring me into my being and realize, yeah, I'm in a world of shit, but I know it. And this music drives me and it carries me through that moment and drives me onto, that next experience. So, these are these are things that each one of us have found that are our keys and paths, that we have found so that we can reconnect with ourselves. And of course, working in cannabis and being the oldest continuous operating dispensary in the country, I've had to work within my community for decades, coming on 22 years. I had to talk with my police. I have to engage with my city council members. I have to talk with my neighborhoods and neighborhood associations, as well as talk to the people who come in every day, So I have found my way that it's impossible not to be part of the community. By plugging yourself so deep into the community, you become part of it, and that's a wonderful thing that, people recognize. You can talk and engage, but, these are things I didn't necessarily know or nor did I ever realize I would envision or embody these. These were just experience that came along the way post my military experience, because I chose to live my life and try these opportunities that life came by, just like all of my fellow council members here. So as we wrap up the discussion, I also once again say, if somebody you know is feeling suicidal, please call 1-800-273-TALK or text 838-255. If you've lost somebody you love to suicide and would like support, visit save.org so you can get further information. We understand this has been a challenging talk and discussion, and we kind of actually touched lightly on it, but at the same time, we also got deep into it. I want to thank again everybody who is here tonight: Rico Prieta, Michael Krawitz, Robert Kowalski, Tony Landry, Brian Buckley, and Pearson Kennedy Crosby, who were here earlier, who had to leave just due to life. So thank you all for being here and sharing your life and experiences. And if you want to talk about it, please drop something into chat. We'd be more than happy to have further discussions on it. But at the same time, I want to thank us all for engaging in such a challenging talk, as well as a difficult conversation. And let's keep these going in the future. I have a feeling this will not be our last discussion regarding suicide. It's our first one. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here and for engaging in this discussion. We'll be back in 2 weeks with Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 21. Thank you all for being here tonight, and you all have a great rest of the evening.